I'm live. Hank Penny, as soon as I say those words, immediately jumps up on my lap because she knows what she's getting. I've got her treat on the table here. She was out. I'm sorry for being about 3, 4 minutes late. I had scheduled this for 10:30 p.m. Eastern, and Candy was out in the backyard chasing wabbits, as Danny likes to say. So let's take care of Candy so I can get on with tonight's topic. Shake. There you go. Andy has her treat. I'll go a little off topic at the start. Thank you for SRCX has already been filling up the live chat. And uh, Sarunian, whose name always gives me difficulty because he keeps changing his name. Now Pathman Construction, but I'm just going to say Sharunian is also here. And just going a little off topic off the start in terms of Candy chasing wabbits. She actually killed one yesterday. She got a hold of it. And I don't think there's two now that she has killed. But I don't actually think she's like torn them up or anything. I honestly think they die. I think she's just playing with them and they die of stress. Their hearts give out, whatever the case. I have my coffee. We used to have a lot of foxes. The plural of fox is foxes, is it not? Or foxeye. We used to have a lot of fox in this neighborhood. There's a lot of construction going on. They got displaced from their fox warrens or fox dens or whatever your burrows, whatever you call it. And they somewhat were able to keep the rabbit population in check. But now the fox, I don't see foxes around the neighborhood as often as I used to. And I've noticed that the rabbit population has exploded. And no, we are not having rabbit stew. She buried it in the backyard, in the back 40 there, although it's not a back 40. This is a suburban type, typical suburban type lot. Anyway, man, I'm talking about the top, that which much I feel like I'm channeling J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter books. We're going to talk about the subject that must not be named. This is called the third rail of Canadian politics. It's an issue not to be discussed. If you're unfamiliar with that term, the third rail, when you have a subway system that's runs on electricity, there's a third rail which powers the subway train. And God help you, if you touch that third rail, you're going to be fried. And so they refer to this topic, the topic that much must not be named, as the third rail. And SRCX has put up a joke. What's the difference between a fox and a pig? 6 martinis, or a 2 for a beer, or pick your tequila, a bottle of tequila, pick what you like. I like that joke. I'm going to use that. Anyway, I am going to say the word because I'm convinced YouTubers play at this game. There are certain words that YouTubers do not like to use, and I don't know what all of them are. Um, unaliving, you'll hear a lot of YouTubers say he was made unalive rather than using another word because there's and I'm not that deep down in the weeds. That's not why I do this. My primary motivation is not the almighty dollar. Um, and so if I get if a few, I always say it, if a few nickels and dimes or loonies and toonies fall into my hand from YouTube generating revenue, and if they are willing to throw a few coins in my hat, great. But if they're not, oh well, too bad, so sad for me. I can live with it. Again, the primary motivation behind my channel is not to generate revenue, but for a lot of YouTubers, that is a primary motivating factor. And so the way that YouTube works, this is how I understand it. The algorithms can boost content so that it's more visible, or they can suppress it. And this was proven. This came out widely during in the wake of the 2016 election, specifically around the issue of the Hunter Biden laptop story. And social media sites admitted that they engaged in throttling or suppressing or ensuring that content that promoted this idea of what turned out to be factual, that Hunter Biden's laptop and this disgusting content it contained. Um, you were not allowed to spread that around. Well, you could spread it around, but then Google, the Googles, the Facebooks, the X's, Twitters of the world would suppress it so that hardly anyone saw your content. And it strikes me, this world drives me nuts. And so, what YouTubers do is they play a game. They play games. They change their language. I'm not going to say this word. I'll just say this. And I've played around it myself. I'm not completely, innocent of, ignoring the prevailing landscape of how social media works, how YouTube works. I've referred to the medical intervention instead of using the word vaccine, just to avoid issues. But the word is abortion. There, it's out of the way. So immediately, I'm probably going to get throttled now. Promote your content and you get tons of views. So if your primary motivation is tons of views because that means money, then you play the game. Talk about the things that the Googles, the Facebooks, the Twitters, that they want you to talk about. And it's an unfortunate reality of the world we live in. Imagine, someone going around and lighting newspaper boxes on fire because they don't like the content of the news. That's somewhat what throttling is. I don't like that story. Let's make sure hardly anyone gets to see it. We're going to go firebomb all the newspaper boxes. That would have been a bygone era of throttling. That's how it would have been done. Uh, and then no one gets to read that explosive story about Hunter Biden's laptop. But if they want you to see something, then they'll come and they deliver it right to your door and put it right in your hands. It's right at the top of the news feed. It's right at the top of the algorithms, put it at the top of people's pages when they're scrolling through and people check it out. I would think, I'm not sure, but I would think that my somewhat clickbaity um, thumbnail that I have for this might attract some attention. But we will see. The only way it can attract attention is if it's given exposure, equal exposure to other content. If not, if it's put way at the bottom so that someone has to scroll for 2 minutes before they get to it, well, then they don't see it. And I would think this is one of those topics that is in the back of people's minds, but at the same time, it's one that people don't broach in polite company. You never want, the third rail. It's not just politically, it's also socially. People are afraid to discuss the issue because it's so sensitive. And I have said many times that in order to have meaningful debate and talk about important issues, that you have to risk being offended yourself, and you have to risk being offended. And I'm not it's part of my DNA, it's part of my makeup. I've spoken about it before. I moved around a lot as a kid, so I became somewhat comfortable with being the outsider, not being on the in crowd, not knowing the right words, not having the right style of clothes. Moved from Glen Rock, New Jersey to Burlington, Ontario to Portland, Oregon to Pickering, Ontario. And with it, you should remember when you were in grades 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, when you're growing up and even then through high school, there's a way of doing things and a way of not doing things, and they're not universal. It was different in Glen Rock, New Jersey than it was in Burlington. And it was different again when I went to Portland and different again when I went to Pickering. And everyone else who had been spent their entire life growing up in that area knew the rules, but I was new to them. So I would say the wrong thing or wear the wrong thing or pronounce a word improperly. So I just find it's built into my DNA, or however you want to put it. It's part of my makeup that I can handle being the outsider. There's not much being on. Eat Me is writing that I sound so good on your new speaker. Eat Me, who's in Montreal, is got a new sound system of some type. So wow, I don't think I have the greatest voice in the world. If I ever was, it occurred to me I had friends who went into broadcast journalism, and they would regularly have, there were personalities, and I knew a couple who had their radio voice. I knew some guys on the radio, and they would talk, and they had a specific voice for the radio. And I noticed it with YouTubers as well. That YouTubers, this is going to be explosive. You're not going to believe what and it's like, oh, tone it down, guys. But I get it, you know, and ultimately it's because their primary motivation is chasing the almighty dollar, which again, I cannot say that I'm completely, I'm not going to make myself out to be, I do look, I check. I go onto my YouTube studio and I see how many views I generated, how many nickels, dimes, and quarters fell through, dropped into my hat from YouTube. Sometimes it's loonies and toonies, depends on the content I put out. And I get more little endorphins, more dopamine going into my brain when it's a loony or a toonie as opposed to a nickel. I'm guilty, but being aware of it makes me um it helps mitigate it. And SRCX was saying that me sounding good sounds a little racist. Well, I guess an old white guy isn't supposed to sound good. And Eat Me got it at my favorite place, Costco, um, for $20 off a Bluetooth speaker. I don't like Bluetooth. Uh, and Sharunian's writing SRCX, not racist, just a fact. Whatever. All right, let's get on to the issue of abortion. Tough topic to talk about. And I'm going to be curious to see how much traction this video will get. We're 12 minutes in, and I'm finally going to start diving into it. And I'm going to hit you with with the current reality that is the state of abortion in Canada. And a lot of Canadians are not even aware of this. It was sometime back before 2010 that a pro-life organization called Signal Hill commissioned Angus Reid, a reputable mainstream polling outfit. They wanted to poll. Signal Hill hired Angus Reid to poll Canadians, and they wanted to know whether or not Canadians were aware of the current state of affairs in Canada, and the state of affairs has not changed. And what they found is that something like 80 to 90% of Canadians are not even aware of this simple fact that abortion in Canada is legal at any time and for any reason. I'm going to repeat that again. Abortion in Canada is legal at any time and for any reason. And I just realized I engaged in a bit of redundancy. I said, I'm going to repeat that again. You just need to say, I'm going to repeat that. You don't have to say the again part. I'll say it again or I'll repeat that. Anyway, I'm very self-critical at times, especially surrounding language. That's why I'm such a big George Carlin fan, who I'm also going to be channeling because he did routine. This is what I loved about Carlin. He actually did routines about abortion. You can check it out. YouTube, George Carlin, abortion. He talked about it during his comedy routines. And I'll touch on that. But that is the fact. And most Canadians, even Canadians that I speak to now on those very rare occasions where you're with an individual where you can bring this topic up, the topic that must not be named, trademark, the topic that must not be named. There are very rare instances where you can bring it up. Most times people are like, I don't, and they'll just, they're going to have an aneurysm if you talk about it, so you just leave it alone. It's a YouTube channel. I can talk about whatever I like. And most Canadians are not aware of that fact. There is this illusion that there are restrictions on abortion, in particular around late term abortions. Not true. In point of fact, there are only 3 countries in the world that have this situation of an abortion being legal at any time and for any reason. It's Canada, the communist China, and communist North Korea. We are in great company. And so what that means is a child does not have legal recognition under Canadian law until that child has fully emerged from the birth canal alive. There's this argument put forward, a toe still in the birth canal means that no that individual does not have legal status, legal rights under Canadian law while that toe is still in the birth canal. And I that's typically used in a pejorative fashion and as a straw man by the pro-choice side of the debate. How did we get here? How did we get to a point where Canada, like North Korea, like China, has no restrictions at all? And I want to emphasize that. I mean, that means if you do the ultrasound and you test for the gender of your child, of which there are 2, there's a boy or a girl. We don't ask the developing child how they identify. They're either a boy or a girl. And if you find out it's a girl and you want to have a boy, well, then it is legal in Canada to abort that developing child embryo. Embryo just means small human or small child. That developing human, get rid of it and try again for a boy. Um, I'm just looking over at the messages, so if you notice that I get a little distracted. Um, I'm not gonna. I don't know what SRCX and Eat Me are going on about with Punjabi truckers, but whatever. It's not on topic. I'm going to leave it alone. Uh, and Eat Me is writing in the 1990s, it was 3 months top as an approval to unalive a soul. And I think anyone reading what Eat Me has written can tell which side of the debate she falls on. It was up until 1988. Now, abortion in Canada, I've done some reading just to refamiliarize myself with this debate. A lot of this stuff I know, but it's important to get the dates right, or at least be close. And up until 1968 or 1969, abortion was completely illegal in Canada. And then in and around that time, 1968, 69, that would have been as Pierre Elliott Trudeau became Prime Minister of Canada, abortion was legalized. However, what would happen is a woman or a young girl would have to go before a panel of doctors at a hospital, and it would have to be proven that continuing the pregnancy would be a threat to the health of the mother. If there was and there are instances where taking a pregnancy to full term can lead to maternal death. The mother can die. And so a woman or a girl would have to go before a hospital board and have her abortion approved. And then it would be performed in the hospital. And I want to make another point perfectly clear. Even though before 1968, 69, whatever year it was, abortion was legal, does that mean abortions never took place? Of course they did. Everyone knows that. John Irving's great novel, The Cider House Rules, which was made into a movie with Toby Keith, I think not Toby Keith, Toby Maguire, the kid who played Spider-Man, and Michael Caine, famous movie, Oscar-winning movie, if I'm not mistaken, dealt I know the book. I never saw the movie. I read the book. I like John Irving. I've read World According to Garp, The Hotel New Hampshire, A Prayer for Owen Meany, and Cider House Rules. Often I prefer books to movies. And at any rate, uh, so did abortions take place before they opened it up to allow for medically necessary abortion procedures? Yes, they did. Backroom abortions. And depending on in the book Cider House Rules, the main character is a doctor who performs them um, medically in a medically proper fashion. And there's one scene where he's called to a rather prominent political figure, like a senator or someone like that, whose teenage daughter has gotten pregnant, and he's offered a large sum of money. He goes and he performs the procedure, and then they try to throw all kinds of money at him because mainly about keeping his mouth shut. Very contentious issue. Amazing that John Irving got a novel published on it, but he's an amazing author. If you haven't read him, I encourage you to read. I don't doubt he's even alive anymore. Uh, so from that was the law in 1968, 1969, and that would happen. Girls got pregnant when I was in high school. I know some who did. They would disappear for a year. And this had gone on for decades. I think it was more of a problem, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, before the birth control pill became pervasive and society opened up and they started teaching birth control in health class, how to use a condom, IUD, intrauterine device, and other methods of birth control. Before that, sex, you wouldn't talk about it, and girls would get pregnant, and it wasn't uncommon to have a young girl, high school student, would go away for a year. She'd disappear, and if anyone asked, they would say, "Oh, her aunt is sick and they need help around the house, so Susie has gone to her aunt's house to help out." And then the baby would be born, given up for adoption, and then Susie would return to school much older and wiser and more knowledgeable about the world. I know one young lady took her out once. That situation. And the Catholic Church used to run something of a I don't know what you would call it. I was going to use the term convalescent home. That's not the right word. It was a place where pregnant teenage girls went. I don't know, a retreat of sorts, where they would go for the year or the 9 months that they were pregnant, and then the child would be given up for adoption. And there's never been an issue in adopting children out. There has always been high demand. Um, I have two cousins who were adopted in this type of situation back in the 1960s. And, it was not uncommon. My aunt and uncle adopted they had a child, and then my aunt was informed she had to have a medical procedure performed and she was no longer going to be capable of having any more children. And both her and my uncle wanted more children, so they applied to the relevant government agencies to adopt. And eventually, a year or two later, after they'd had their first, they were given a child, but that was to be their only one because there was such high demand. And they would come by every month or 2 months, 3 months, whatever it was, check in, see how they were doing with the young little bundle of joy. And then seeing that my aunt and uncle were doing such a fantastic job with the first child, they put them at the front of the list and they got a second, which was apparently quite rare. And so I have two cousins. I don't have any experience firsthand with this, having a child out of wedlock, adopting it out experience. I have to imagine that would be gut wrenching for the mother to carry a child to term, give birth, and then to hand it over. What's brought this issue up, what has brought this issue to the fore in my mind, what got me thinking about it again, is political discussions around the recent loss of the Conservatives once again 4 in a row to the liberals. And there has been some commentary, some chatter online from the conservative camp, which is very divided. And there are individuals who probably didn't even vote conservative, probably didn't even vote for Pierre Poilievre in the Conservative Party of Canada, who are saying, the reason they lost is because I can't vote for them because Pierre Poilievre very clearly during the French language debate, I did not hear this issue come up at all during the English language debate, but it came up in the French language debate. Oui, je suis bilingue, j'étais capable de le regarder, de le voir sans traduction. J'aime écouter les leaders sans un traducteur, traductrice. I don't want, when I listen to the French language debates, I listen to them in French. I understand it. And Pierre Poilievre made a point of asserting that and I don't even think it was prompted, I just think he put it out there that a conservative government, that it has been Conservative Party policy for the past 20 or more years to not, it's as a central plank in the party's platform, if you will, or their statement of beliefs, that they will never reintroduce legislation on abortion, which means no laws whatsoever, anytime, for any reason. I can go on and on about this topic. So from 1968, 1969, abortion becomes legal, but very restricted in Canada. You have to go to a hospital board of doctors. They have to approve it. They have to determine that the health of the mother is severely impacted or that she could die. And then what happened is in the 1980s, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Henry Morgentaler became a national figure. He's for the pro-choice movement, he's something of a saint. Um, um, and SRCX is talking about a band he's aware of that was called Me, Mom, and Morgentaler. SRCX is writing that in a perfect world, abortion should be 100% acceptable. Unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world. It sounds like on this issue, SRCX and I might be somewhat simpatico, which is different. And that's the thing about this is why we need to have these discussions. Eat Me is writing, it's not a side. Something broke, got the after morning pill, was 19 and it failed. That little soul would have been heavily handicapped. Trust me, it stays with you always. I'm sure that any woman who's gone through the procedure, and I'm convinced, I'm no doubt in my mind whatsoever that everyone in Canada who knows at least 3 women, maybe 4 or 5, but everyone in Canada knows a woman who has had an abortion. And they may not be aware of the fact that in their circle, they know 40, 50 women. They may not be aware the women who've had the procedure are not going to talk about it, but I guarantee you, I would wager money on it, but I'd never be able to win the bet because a lot of women, it's just something they will not talk about. It's put in that closet that gets locked and the key is thrown away. It never happened, but it did. SRCX is writing that the birth control pill has greatly altered how women interact with suitable mates due to the synthetic alteration of natural hormone levels. What I have heard is that a woman taking the birth control pill that and I heard this from Dr. Jordan Peterson, that women not on birth control are more inclined to be attracted to men who display masculine characteristics like a square jaw and the lumberjack type, whereas women who are on birth control are more prone to be sexually attracted to men who are more androgynous in nature. Yeah, and it's interesting. You look at the 1960s and you look at the bands and you look at Mick Jagger, Mick Jagger, Chicken Lips or whatever they used to, not Chicken Lip, whatever you used to call him with his big lips and Ozzy Osbourne, Quiet Riot, not Quiet Riot, actually Slade. Yeah, and the lead singers in bygone eras used to be far more masculine. And then we move into, by the time we move into the 70s, we started to get into glam rock. We started to get into guys dressing as women. And then and guys started to wear makeup. I mean, I think of Sly and the Family Stone with that song, on the cover of a Rolling Stone, wanna see my picture on the cover, and, singing like that, singing, and you see the guy with the eye patch, and they look like a bunch of guys who just came rough and tumble out of a bar, and that was rock and roll in the 50s, especially the 60s, early 70s, but then we got into this glam rock, and then you got guys like Bon Jovi, John Bon, and or Aha, and they're very pretty. They're pretty boys. Just a different world, different world. So that's just commenting on what SRCX has written with respect to the manner in which synthetic birth control impacts. I have not read the studies. I'm just repeating what I heard Jordan Peterson say. Anyway, to me, it makes intuitive sense that that would happen. And the reason it makes intuitive sense for me is that a woman who is going through her natural cycles and everything, when she's at a period where, pregnancy is possible, then, I don't completely toss Darwinian's theory of evolution. I throw the evolution stuff out the window. This idea that we came out of a primordial soup by poof magic. I throw that out the window. But in terms, I think it is built into the fabric of reality that women who are they want to seek out a suitable mate, and they want to seek out a mate who's going to produce strong offspring. And you look for a big, strong, masculine guy. Uh, but when you take that out of the equation, now, well, I want a guy who's kind. I want a guy who's this. I want a guy who's that. I don't want a guy who can chop wood and look after me. I want someone who will massage my feelings, whatever. Anyway, um, Eat Me thinks I'm 100% right on this one. Every now and again, people agree, but I'll tell you, and I keep digressing because it's such a difficult issue to talk about, is um, what happened with Henry Morgentaler. So in sometime in the 1980s, he started opening abortion clinics. I think his first one was in Montreal. I know he later opened one up in Toronto. We're talking about either 85, 86, 87, somewhere in and around those years. And he was breaking the law because he would perform first trimester abortions. And he was an interesting cat, Dr. Henry Morgentaler, because he, in today's discussion, would be considered anti abortion because it is now sacrosanct in Canada that a woman can get an abortion at any time for any reason. But Henry Morgentaler had an issue with uh, at any time. He did not want he was opposed to abortions being performed after a certain number of weeks. I would have to check exactly how many. I tried to look it up before doing the video. There's a quote out there widely viewed at the time, and I've still been able to find it. I just couldn't find it this time. But it's somewhere in around the 24-week mark, somewhere around there. And what he said is that what we want, he uses the term fetus and child. And he said, we want to, abort the fetus before it becomes a child. And he said around the 24-week mark, I'm not sure it was exactly 24, but somewhere in that neighborhood. He said around the 24-week mark, I have an issue with that because then we're not aborting a fetus, we're aborting a child. So even Henry Morgentaler, who's a saint to the pro-life side and the devil incarnate to the pro-life side, even he acknowledged in his estimation, at some point during pregnancy, at some point during that development, when the child is developing in his mind at a certain point, somewhere around 24 weeks, that developing child becomes a human being, and he seemed to regard it as murder. And this is where we get into nuance. And there are still Canadians who believe that you cannot get a late term abortion. However, back in and around 2010 to 2015, some states started to bring in restrictions on late term abortions. And they started closing clinics. Clinics stopped performing late term abortions. I managed to find an article written in Global News talking about the fact that in Ontario, which is one of the few provinces that provides data on abortion procedures, that over 100 women in the last year had for the year they were reporting, had gone for late term abortions in the United States. I have the article here, so I'm going to share the screen. I know that tends to make my videos lag. I don't have the greatest internet connection, but let's see. There's the article, and it's the headline is how the wave of U.S. restrictions will affect Canadian women sent there for abortions. I'm just going to read it. Dozens of Canadian women traveled to the and I notice it says here dozens. It strikes me they want to play it down. That's not inaccurate. It's a question of how many dozens. Later in the article, as you'll see, it says over 100 just in Ontario alone. But it says dozens of Canadian women travel to the US every year for abortions paid for by their provincial governments. And this is another reason we have to discuss this. This is a government funded procedure, according to data attained by Global News. But as some states move to restrict and criminalize the procedure, experts say that could have a big impact on Canadian women by both limiting options for out of country, quote unquote, care and potentially increasing wait times in Canada. And there's a quote: people who access abortion care, especially for later term abortion care. I love how they frame this as care. They have to travel to the United States to do that, said Frederic Chabot, Director of Health Promotion at Action Canada for Sexual Health and Rights. People go and seek them in the United States, he goes on. So if these services are not offered in the United States anymore, we are going to see effectively a reduction of abortion access for Canadian people as well. Neither Statistics Canada, and this is an important point, this is true, neither StatsCan nor the Canadian Institute for Health Information maintains data on out-of-country abortions. How can you talk about a problem when relevant government agencies that should be collecting the data, when they aren't collecting the data? And why don't they collect it? Because they don't want us to talk about it. This is another example of it being that proverbial third rail. So neither StatsCan nor this Canadian Institute for Health Information maintains data on out of country abortions. Different provinces also have varying policies on whether they collect some, all, or no information. Ontario's health ministry was the only province to provide Global News with detailed data on out of country abortions. The province covered abortion services in the US for more than 100. How many more? Was it 200? That could mean it was 1,000. 1,000 is more than 100. Like, the way that media outlets play with language, this is the reason why Canadians are tuning out of mainstream legacy media outlets. Technically, they're not lying. If it's 1,100, uh, and this is back to 2014, and this article was written in 2019, but they don't tell you how many more than 100. So, it could be hundreds a year, which is dozens, a lot of dozens, but, anyway, those procedures added up to more than $1.5 million in US money. This does not include women who go to the US and pay the costs themselves. Under Ontario's out-of-country medical program, abortion services are covered if the requested service is medically necessary. Well, because a woman, a girl, one of the reasons that can be given is mental health. Well, it's medically necessary due to mental health reasons. I can't, I'll have an anxiety attack, whatever. If the patient cannot get the procedure in Ontario, or if waiting for the procedure in Ontario would result in death or irreversible harms. A spokesman for the Ontario ministry said the fact that some women are being sent outside Canada for abortions does not mean there are gaps in abortion services in the province. There is no evidence that there is any system-wide issues with access to these procedures in the province, spokesman David Jensen wrote in an email. The need for the province to fund out-of-country therapeutic abortions is limited, and the reasons for accessing this procedure out of country vary for each individual. I know that in the province of Quebec, all late-term abortions were sent down to a clinic. I believe it was in the state of Vermont. It made quite the splash in the media because that clinic, that American clinic, closed, and now and they were saying that choice is choice. Doesn't matter when, doesn't matter the reason. And we have to do something to fix this problem. We have to make sure that women have access to late-term abortion services. Yet experts disagree, saying the fact that even a small number of Canadian women have to go south of the border points to gaps in availability. Though the Ontario data does not break down the data based on the type of abortion, they're likely for third trimester abortions. That would be my guess. And I'm going to leave the article there. Uh, it's uh, and I'm going to try and catch up on what's being written. I see Koj Malik has shown up. I appreciate the fact that women are here. Nancy Eat Me is a woman. I know Koj Malik is a woman. SRCX, I know he's a guy. Um, and he's talking about his life. SRCX lives up in the Yukon Territory, and I think my YouTube channel is something of a social outlet for him, and that's fine. I would get it totally. Um, and he's going on about politics. Uh, and SRCX is also a bit of a certain type of disturber. I do my best not to swear on this channel. I don't always succeed, but he's a certain type of disturber. I'm right all the time. I knew everything. Okay, okay. SRCX is like he's mega. He's totally well. He's make Yukon great again. He's going to be the leader of the Yukon. Okay, because SRCX knows everything. Okay, he's right all the time. Never been wrong ever. Anyway, uh, and Eat Me is saying hi to Koj Malley. Hi, missed you bunch, girl. What's happening down in Florida? And Koj Malik is writing, why limit yourself? You can chop wood and massage your feelings. Getting back to my point, or SRCX had brought up, how uh, let me end the sharing of this, make my screen work a little better. Um, Getting back to how the birth control pill may or may not. I don't know the studies. I don't have the requisite knowledge to speak to it other than to just parrot back my understanding of what Jordan Peterson said. Um, and Koj Malik, and I like this. I like this, and this is why Koj Malik and even SRCX. I like it when people come onto my channel with whom I disagree, because we can disagree without necessarily having to be disagreeable. Koj Malik, SRCX, or others who've come on the channel who disagree with me, and my view is the good ones stick around, the bad ones retreat back to their echo chamber, and they're not willing to engage with the other side. And that's an unfortunate thing, but that's the world we live in, sadly. Um, and I've told you before, SRCX, come on, man, memory. You know everything. You gotta work on that memory. SRCX is from Montreal, and it is she. She's made it available publicly. Her name is Nancy, so that should make it easier. Okay. And it's funny with her name, Eat Me. When I was at York University, some of the students who were in lit or media studies came out with a publication. Just they came out with their own little magazine as something of a project that they continued for some time afterward, and it was called Eat Me Literally. And I remember there was a column rather than complaints. Their complaint section was "What's up your butt?" It was very juvenile, but that kind of stuff can play. Uh, and then we have Eat Me saying, rather than have a foot massage than a feeling massage. No kidding. um, And SRCX is asking, did you see the woman interviewed during the Polyev campaign? Wow. No, I didn't. But I imagine if it was CBC, CTV Global, they would try to pick someone, they would play the straw man game. They would try to pick someone who would, this guilt by association. They'd try to pick the most regrettable person they could to disparage Pierre Polyev, because the media is scared to death of Pierre Polyev, because he threatened. Sorry about that. This can happen on occasion, and I found out how to address it sometimes because I live in a rural area, Northumberland County, southeastern Ontario. More apples here than people, more apple trees than people, um, because I'm out in the boonies and the sticks in the country. Sometimes my connection gets unstable and I can disconnect. And when that happens, I found, I have such high levels of technical skill. Turn it off, turn it back on, reboot, and it works. So I'm back. So if it happens where all of a sudden you see myself freeze, just give me a minute and I should be back on. Uh, let's see what's being written. And I had forgotten to put on the live chat. I had it on pop chat, and I hate that. Um, and OJ Malik is okay. Wait, OJ Malik is writing that Viagra and Cialis is government funded for over 50 for men over 50. Uh, or saying, and it seems to be implying that, perhaps that has some impact on issues, health issues for children. I don't know. Have studies been done? This is one thing I'm liking about RFK. He wants the studies to be done. It strikes me, non-medical background, that there seems to be reticence on the part of the medical community and the pharmaceutical companies in particular, pushing back against any further studies, investigations, or protocols, because it's too expensive. It's going to hurt our profit. But uh, OJ Malik's writing that they are going to roll back birth control also. Uh, and SRCX says that's one thing, autism. I never knew a single non-verbal child when I was growing up. Now, does that mean they weren't there? I came from an era where they had special schools, and we had, quote unquote, we would call it the short bus. You better not bang your head. You better not fall off your bike and bang your head, or you'll be riding the short bus. We would make it something of a joke. Uh, SRCX, well, if you're going to be living in the Yukon, you better be an alpha male. I'm going to get back onto the abortion debate, and I'm going to be interesting to see what happens with this video. If you enjoy my take on things, if you think this is, I, I'm trying to be very polite, very careful, um, trying to be very clinical in a fashion, not trying to be very emotional about things, because that's the problem I find with the debate, is that it's dominated by the extremes. It's the extreme pro-life types who believe that life begins the moment that sperm enters the egg and fertilizes it, that life has begun, and that any move to terminate that embryonic, earliest stage fertilized egg, anything, and it gets into, they're opposed to the morning after pill for that reason. But this is where I mentioned before that George Carlin does a routine on this, and when he talks about abortion, he mentions the fact that not every fertilized egg ends up securing. It has to then I forget the anatomy, when it goes down the tube or whatever, and then it attaches to the wall of the uterus, and it basically implants itself there, and then pregnancy starts. However, not every fertilized egg ends up implanting in the uterus. Some get flushed out during, as George Carlin, during that wonderful time that happens about once a month. It just and it ends up on a sanitary napkin, is how he put it. I mean, it's really, this is, I try to approach it with humor, and I think he succeeds. He's so, George Carlin was so incredible with his skill with language. I consider him something of a Picasso or a Leonardo or a Michelangelo in terms of how he was able to paint with words. And he could talk about the most controversial things and craft the language so incredibly well and make you laugh. Uh, uh, Now, I'm just Amy is writing, Gordon, my theory, why it was allowed past 3 months. Stem cell harvesting, that's very possible. That's very possible. And there's another procedure, and it's disgusting to even contemplate, and I'm not going to go into detail, but it's called partial birth abortion, when a child is so incredibly developed that uh, there, and you can look into it yourself if you're so inclined. Partial birth abortion, what happens? And you can even read the story about a young Canadian woman. I don't know how old she is, but she was born alive and thrown onto a heap, just thrown onto the floor and let her die. No legal rights, although she should have. And a nurse took her and kept her alive and cared for her. And, she was supposed to have been aborted. It was a late term abortion. And that type of individual will never get any play in the mainstream media, because the mainstream media, and I suspect the YouTubes, Facebooks, and Twitters of this world are all in on this idea that abortion is good, Planned Parenthood is good, that the Western world, that we need to reduce levels of population so that we can backfill the population with people coming from the developing world. And um, SRCX is writing, problem is people having sex like cats and dogs for material sense, just for material or just for gratification, not material gratification, just gratification, sexual gratification. Um, Sex is for having children, period. That's not the pervasive view in our culture. You sound like you sound very Roman Catholic. And Koji Malik, with respect to me talking about George Carlin, is using the term wordsmith. But beyond that, he would, to me, like I say, he was Rembrandt, he was Michelangelo, he was Leonardo da Vinci. He was a master. Uh, and Coach Malik said if people only had sex for having kids, there wouldn't be sex after three kids. It's a biological urge. And, when I talk about my Christian faith, we all have our bugaboos, we all have our challenges, we all have, and lust, guilty, guilty. And that's why, I was talking the other day that I was having a conversation at my workplace with a customer who's gay. And I don't care, because the fact of the matter is, Jesus exhorts his followers to look at the log in your own eye before looking at the speck in your neighbor's eye. And I have a log in my eye. And so I pray that I do believe, what the Bible teaches, that sex is a gift from God, and that it is for to be within the confines of a marriage between a man and a woman, end of story, full stop. That's God's design. Of course, Satan whispers in our ear and says, well, you don't have to follow those rules. You can make up your own rules. You can do what is right in your own eyes. And I've been guilty. I've been guilty. I have had sex out of that narrow biblical paradigm, that narrow God designed paradigm. I've gone outside the boundaries. So can I look at a homosexual and go, you're worse than me? No, I'm just as bad as them. And that's one of my, where I think Christians, we shoot ourselves in the foot, where we are poor witnesses for the most, Jesus Christ, is because we are mean, spiteful, and hateful a lot of the time. And I think a lot of it is in terms of homosexuality, while we're talking about taboo subjects. A lot of it is because there are a lot of men, I believe, who are out there who um, have been sexually attracted to men, and it disgusts them, self-hatred. And so rather than attacking themselves, they attack those who embrace the lifestyle. Maybe you could call it jealousy. I don't know. I'm sure that comment has been made by many. But at the same time, I never heard Jesus speaking in those terms about it. So um, let's see what's being written. Eat Me is writing, hey, just think, after that 24-hour power outage in Europe, they might have a baby boom in 9 months. I did not aware it was not. And that's interesting that you bring that up, because my youngest, 11, grade 6, was that we had a power outage today here, and it lasted a couple hours. And he asked me, did the power go out when you were growing up back in the day? And I, of course, brought up that August, I think it was 2001. I think it was August 2001 when that major power outage hit the northeastern part of Canada and the US. And remember it well. And there was a baby boom after that. So no TV, no entertainment, can't turn on the stereo. And SRCX is saying not Roman Catholic, been celibate for over 30 years. Well, you're living in the Yukon with the elk and the moose and the deer and the grizzlies rubbing their noses up against your window. Sharun is saying something about, for some reason, I believe cleaning room. Okay. And I like what Koj Malik is writing, even though we often disagree. I like this. This is really good. She says, I have enough work to do. I don't need to take on God's job. And I like the fact that she writes God, capital G, capital O, capital T. Uh, uh, and SRCX, leave that one alone. Does God even exist? We've had that debate. You're allowed to disagree, but it's SRCX, like I said, is a disturber. He just likes to stir things up, which I get. And Koji Malik asking, was it the Roman soldiers that had real brotherly love? if you read, um, the Greeks were more known for it. I'm sure it exists. Well, it's all a human history. I'm sure it was, it was in Rome for sure. Caligula and the like. Sorry, I'm starting to lose my voice. But if you read Plato's Symposium, which I've read going back to my school days, and I think it's Socrates is talking about the height of love being the love of an older man for a young adolescent boy. And anyway, it is what it is. And that was written 3,000 ish years ago. Um, Coach Malik is asking me a question. If I get a chance, what is supposed to happen when Jewish people return to Israel? I've covered that before. I would ask you to read Ezekiel chapters 36 and 37. Ezekiel gives a prophecy for the land of Israel and for the people. The land is told that the people, the Jewish God's covenant chosen people, the Israelites, the Jewish people, that they're going to return. And he gives a promise, a prophesized promise to the land of Israel. And then there's a prophesized promise to the people of Israel. And that's not the subject of tonight's video, but I will say that God says I think it's in chapter 37, where the prophecy is that it's not because you've been so good and wonderful and righteous and perfect. It's not because of you being so great. It's in spite of how crappy and wicked and evil you've been. In spite of how horrible you've been, I will still do these things. And SRCX is talking about critical thinking. I'm losing my voice. I've been going on an hour. Seems to hit at about the hour mark. SRCX is talking about critical thinking, which Eatme is saying critical thinking went out the window in 2020, whatever that means. And then, so let me get back to the point. This polarization in the abortion debate. Welcome to my live stream. Welcome to my, I guess you would call it a podcast. That's what I do. I go all over the place and then I try to bring it back. Sometimes I succeed, sometimes I don't. So the debate is dominated by the extremes. And I think the biggest issue we have, and the reason why things are as they are right now, where an abortion is legal for any time and any reason, anyone stopping in just now who didn't see, what I said at the very beginning, is the fact that most Canadians are not even aware of the fact that abortion can take place at any time and for any reason. There are no laws in the books concerning abortion at all. I was talking about Dr. Henry Morgentaler and it was back in 1988 that the Supreme Court of Canada struck down that abortion law from 1968-69, which allowed an abortion provided a woman went before a panel of doctors and was granted the procedure because it affected health, because it was a threat to her health or life. Then but it would have to be approved. And that law was struck down. Dr. Henry Morgentaler went to jail. He started opening up abortion clinics, and girls and women started coming to get procedures. So he was thrown in jail. He challenged it. The Supreme Court struck the law down. They said that it violated the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, specifically the part about security of the person. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the security of the person. They said that the abortion law, as it was written, violated that. And the Mulroney government was poised to reintroduce legislation that was worded differently, that they believed, the Mulroney government believed, that it would pass Supreme Court oversight, that they would review it and that they would give it the approval. But what happened was the Senate rejected it. It's one of the few times, and the only time I can think of, where Canada's Senate, an unelected body, actually injected itself well, there are two instances, but this is one of the two that I know where the Senate actually stepped in and said, no, we're not going to approve legislation. And then what happened is we went into an election, and it was put, because it's such a contentious issue, it was just left aside and never revisited. And so all the no laws exist in Canada regarding abortion. And that is why, uh, and right to it is sacrosanct. You know, if you don't like the sex of the child, if you having a girl and you wanted a boy, well, then just get rid of the girl and try again. And that does happen. Canadian Medical Association actually wrote a paper on it showing that statistically, it's reasonable, more than reasonable. It is happening. Uh, and we'll get on to what you're writing SRCX in a second, but want to. I'm really meandering, and my voice is coming back a bit now. It's not scratching so much. So we got to this situation. And what has happened is I was talking about how the debate is dominated by the extremes. The extreme pro-life side says anytime, any reason, doesn't matter. Hey, if you don't like the sex of the child, well, get rid of it. Then that's your right. That's your choice. Has to be protected. And my connection is unstable, so I've got to do that thing. Oh, nope, it's back before I even got a chance to exit out. So two extremes. The extreme of life, once the sperm's in the egg, that's a life, and you got to protect that life. It's a life. It's a life. It's a life. And the reason we got into the situation we're in now, this is my opinion, this is what I'm convinced of, is the fact that the extreme pro-life types would never allow an abortion in pretty much any case. And the pro-life side of the equation, I think most Canadians are reasonable enough to say, you know what, we should have some restrictions. Every country in the world, if you go to Denmark, Sweden, France, Norway, I'm not, Iceland, I'm not talking about um, hyper religious societies. I'm not talking about, theocracies like Iran. I'm talking about, Western democratic countries. They all have limitations. They all have laws on the book that severely restrict an individual's right. I say individual, a woman or a girl's right to access abortion services in later stage pregnancy. All of them do. But in Canada, we do not. And it's sad to me because it speaks to Canadian society writ large. It diminishes the value of human life when we treat it so disparagingly. Oh, just get rid of it. And I think it's only in the context of a world like this, like we have in Canada, where we can have this MAID law, medical assistance in dying, where, and I haven't brought it up for a while, but I've mentioned it before about a Canadian Forces veteran and Paralympian, a woman who's wheelchair bound, who lives in a raised bungalow of some description, and so she was forced to, when going in or out of the house, to slide on her ass, dragging or pulling her wheelchair up and down the stairs. And so she got in contact with Veterans Affairs and asked them if they could help her with the financially to get a ramp built into her house so she would have easier access getting in and out. And the worker at Veterans Affairs said, well, we can make medical assistance in dying available to you if that would help. And that is disgusting, but it's only in the context of a country where we treat life at its most early stages so banally, as if it's not life, is tough. This is why we're in the situation that we're in, where we treat, a Canadian veteran and Paralympian. So we treat her life as like it's nothing. Well, we treat life at the earliest stages, in a third trimester where everything's fully developed, heart, kidneys, lungs, everything's in place. And if the child was born prematurely, it's completely viable. But and I do think we should have legislation, but the reason we don't is because the argument is put forward by the pro-life camp that sure, we restrict third term, late term, viable, you know, child can live outside the womb, no problem. Yeah, we restrict that, but then the extreme pro-life types are going to keep pushing it until a girl who's been raped at 12 by her uncle will be forced to carry the child to term. And that's where the problem. And I wish and what has to happen is we need to change the culture. We need to, I hate the expression, hearts and minds, but that's the stage we're at. And I'm throwing my voice out there, suggesting that it's an issue we need to start talking about. And again, just, my going all over the place, but this came to mind because there are conservative voices out there who have refused to vote for the Conservative Party of Canada, led by Pierre Poilievre, because of his statement during the French language debate that it's been Conservative Party policy for 20 years and it will not be changing, that the Conservative government will never reintroduce legislation on the issue of avortement, which is the French word for abortion, because he only said it in the French language debate. He didn't touch it in the English language debate. It never came up. And the reason that Pierre Poilievre won't touch it is because he doesn't want. If Pierre Poilievre said that we're going to, look at the abortion file, we're going to open that up, we're going to discuss it, we may introduce legislation. If he does that, Conservative Party support would collapse. It would absolutely collapse. And so what needs to happen, and this is where the church, this is where Christians, this is where we have to look at the log in our own eye, stop being so holier than thou, judgmental. And we need to talk about this with love, with care, with, understanding, recognizing that if you go to an evangelical church, if you go to a Bible chapel where people are rolling in the aisles, where people have got their hands up and everything, I can promise you there are women in there who have had abortions. Promise you. I can't prove it, but if there was some way to empirically prove it, I can bet you there would be, if there's a congregation of 500 women, I bet you there's at least a dozen women in there who have had abortions. And they'll, and like I said, it's gone into that closet with the door locked and the key thrown away, never to be talked about again. So I'm going to end it there and I'll read what's been written. SRCX is asking, if a bird owns the sky, does a fish own the river? Does a deer own the forest? Ownership is a system of our material consciousness and related to the bodily concept of life. It's the old question, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to see it, doesn't make any sound. And that seems like the famous philosophical question, but it's actually a scientific question as well, because consciousness. Does consciousness create reality or is it a reaction to reality? And, we get into subatomic particles and their ability to be in multiple places at different times, acting in different ways. And how does consciousness interplay with the empirical world? And it's beyond my pay grade. SRCX is writing that 1.1, we have a species, so he's pasting something. We as a species have chosen to identify as I am this body rather than I am the energy that animates the body or this body, thus becoming captivated by material sense gratification and material designations. Okay, you're cut and pasting stuff. I like hearing your own thoughts. I do these live and unscripted. Here's what I wrote out. This is it. This is it. My little bullet points written down on a piece of paper with a game of the score from a game of Crazy Eights against my big guy. Why meaningful debate is important on contentious issues. If you want to have anything meaningful to talk about, you got to be willing to risk offending and to risk being offended yourself. How YouTube will probably throttle my video and they'll probably take the monetization off. Oh no, I don't get the nickel. like I care. Um, and, about the political component. These are just the bullet points I wrote down. And then I wrote down current situation 1988, because it's 1988 that the abortion law was struck down, leaving us with this current situation. And as things have progressed, abortion has become more and more available. It was back during Stephen Harper's reign, when he was prime minister, that a backbench MP, who I think the name was Woodward, he put forth a proposal asking for Parliament simple. He said he wanted Parliament to condemn the practice of aborting an unborn child because it's a girl. And that to me is a no-brainer. That to me is a no-brainer. You don't get rid of an unborn child because it's a girl. But Harper would not even allow it to come up for a vote, because he politically third rail. If I touch that issue, they're going to say, oh, he's opening it up. This is the slippery slope. He wants to condemn sex selective abortion. Then it'll be late term abortion. Then it'll be, any abortion. They'll go we'll go full Tennessee or something, or full Mississippi. And so that's why we're in the situation we are in now. Let's see. And Eat Me is writing, what is surprising is how a very religious society, Ireland, they did a complete 180 on the subject. Look at Quebec. Quebec, 99% of the province still, well, maybe not so much now, but 99% of the province, Roman Catholic. And the Catholic Church has always been very pro-life, even to this day. And yet, during that quiet revolution that started sometime in and around the 1950s, Quebec society, by and large, basically walked away from the church and all of its values. And that's the issue. We live in such a polarized world that the Catholic Church, up until the 1950s in Quebec, was the paragon of virtue and everything good and holy and wonderful in this world. That was the Catholic Church. And then it went the complete 180, and the Catholic Church became everything that was wrong with Quebec society, and it was rejected en masse. I went to Catholic Mass regularly. My wife was brought up in the Roman Catholic tradition, and I've talked about my faith journey many times on here, how I started getting my feet back onto the Christian path, as it were, in and around the age of 40. And it's been a slow, steady walk. And when I was living in Quebec from 2011 until, which was, when I was about 45, 2011 to 2015. She was brought up Roman Catholic. So we would alternate. We would go to the base, Valcartier base Protestant chapel, which was called St. Albans, and we would go there once every other week. And the interceding weeks, we would go to a Roman Catholic Mass. She liked going to Roman Catholic Mass because even though she didn't understand the language, the rhythm of the service was the same. Just the language was different, but the reading of the Psalms, the Lord be with you, the Mass, the giving of communion, the rhythm was the same. But she also enjoyed going to St. Albans because it was in English. I like going to both. I still remember the priest at the church we attended in Val-Belair, Quebec, which is northern Quebec City, just near Valcartier. The priest, his name was Father La Rochelle, and his sermons were very thought-provoking. I enjoyed them. I remember him talking about different hats. I remember one sermon in particular where he talked about, wearing different hats. And we all wear different hats. There's Gordon Causey, the father, Gordon Causey, the uncle, Gordon Causey, the brother, Gordon Causey, the husband, Gordon Causey, the worker, Gordon Causey, the friend, Gordon Causey, the pain in the rear end YouTuber. We all have different hats. The thing I try to do on my station is be as genuine as I can, recognizing that this is an unnatural forum. I'm not sitting down with someone, but I try to make it be the same way I would be if I was having a conversation with someone. Eat Me is writing that Gordon, if I am not mistaken, Pierre Poilievre said, if a member of the party would bring a bill on the parliament floor about abortion, he wouldn't shut it down, dodging the issue but not dismissing it either. That is not what I heard him say during the French language debate. He said that the Conservative Party, led by him, that they would not introduce any legislation about avortement. I'll have to recheck. I'm sure, it's probably searchable, so you don't have to watch the whole hour, 2 hour long French debate. Koji Malik is saying that cut and paste is anti-critical thinking. I'm not a big fan of cut and pasting, but I do it on occasion myself, especially with words that I have trouble spelling. There are certain words that are problematic for me. Eat Me uses Brave, never have ads. I don't know what Brave is. You were cutting and pasting. SRC actually even had the notations there, 1.1 and the little up symbol telling me you were writing that out. Emi's writing good one, Koji Malik. Koji Malik writes, other countries have done that and they have answered the question of what happens when you abort girl fetuses. Yeah, we should talk about it in Canada, but we don't. We're afraid to. And and for the abortion industry, and it is an industry. Very early in the stream, SRCX brought up some numbers that I did some Googling before I did this video. I was just curious. I know there's some stats out there, and the number of abortions in Canada is pegged. The reported number is up, punches in and around the 100,000 mark. And I was reading a story about how that had dropped by about 10,000 in 2020, 2021 because of COVID. And I think that's reasonable to assume that COVID drove down the number of what we shall say unplanned pregnancies because people were too afraid to breathe the air of another individual. So forget going beyond that. And then I further looked and tried to get a handle on how much does OHIP, the Ontario Hospital Insurance Program or Ontario Health Insurance Program, our healthcare system, how much does it pay for abortion services? And if they're performed in hospital, the doctor earns somewhere around, depending on how involved it is, $700-800, but it can be $2,000-3,000. So I'll go low end and say somewhere around $1,000. That's in a hospital where all the equipment's there and everything. Now, if it's done in a private clinic and not covered by OHIP and a woman or a girl is paying out of pocket, she's going to be paying $2,000-3,000, maybe more. So how much money does the government of Canada spend every year on abortion? It's got to be hundreds of millions of dollars at a time when Canadians can't get a family doctor, when we're waiting in line for things like cancer screening and cataracts and knee replacement, hip replacement, and goodness knows what else. There are even routine procedures for younger people. And it was disgusting to me that during the COVID era, abortion remained essential. That was a very telling thing to me. There was a man who was originally from Calgary, a musician, who needed a life-saving heart procedure done, but they refused to do it because of COVID. It's too dangerous. We can't risk viral transmission. Oh, but you want to have an abortion? That's essential. We can risk viral transmission for an abortion, but we can't risk it to save someone's life. And you talk about a cult of death that is taking over Canada. You talk getting back into the Bible, you talk about Molech, which Molech was the god to whom the Canaanite people were sacrificing their children. And this culture, I don't see the court. The king is coming back, and he's going to set the ship right. That's all I have to say on the matter. And I have Eat Me writing about Maurice Duplessis, who was something of an iron-fisted, almost dictatorial ruler of Quebec right up until the 1950s. I think he was from the 30s, 40s, and into the 50s, or maybe 40s, saying the Duplessis children scandal had a lot to do why Catholicism dropped. I'm not familiar with, I know Maurice Duplessis and, oh, what, I'm trying to, Union Nationale was the name of his party, National Union. The Union Nationale, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that was his party. And um, he ruled almost like a fascist dictator. If you didn't elect a Union National member to your circumscription, that's what they call a riding in French. If you didn't elect a member, your area would be cut off from all provincial funding. So the very next election, they would elect a Union Nationale member, and they were in power for like 15, 20, maybe 30 years. I don't know. I haven't, it's been so long since I read up on that history. Um, yeah, and SRCX is asking, as opposed to boys, yeah, the unborn child, if it's a boy, is more like, in terms of sex selective abortion, it's disproportionately, overwhelmingly, if not entirely, girl, unborn girls who are being killed because the parents want a boy. And what the Canadian Medical Association did, based on certain cultural communities valuing boys over girls, they went to see, and the way that their methodology was very interesting because they looked at people where the couple already had one, two, or more girls. And so if a couple has had two girls and then is having a third child, what is the chance that that third child will be a boy or a girl? It's a coin flip. It's 50-50 pretty much. I think there's a slight, um, one sex is born just slightly more, but it's only tiny. But it's basically 50-50. But what they found is that second and third children born to people within certain cultural communities, that those second and third children, when there was already a girl child, that it was disproportionately male. And they concluded that their conclusion was that this points to the fact that sex selection abortion is taking place because the numbers didn't line up with other cultural communities. In other cultural communities, you've had two girls, well, the third one, en masse, 50-50 boys and girls, but in certain cultural communities, it tilted more toward boys, suggesting that something's going on here. And their conclusion was it meant that sex selective abortion was taking place. And Eat Me is naming those cultures and the countries. And Eat Me is not afraid to call them out. The thing is, I prefer to deal with people on an individual basis, but I do know cultural norms are cultural norms. But that doesn't mean that an individual within that community will necessarily follow those norms. There are individuals who break away and say, no, I'm not. Yes, I acknowledge that this is part of the cultural norm in the society from which I came and my ancestors came, but I'm divorcing myself from that. And there's a tendency on the part of others to look and say, oh, you're just, all the Irish, you're all like this, and all the, all Indians, you're like this, and all Chinese, you're like this. No, the difficulty is you have to get to know people on an individual basis. I'm not saying those cultural norms don't have that stereotypes are there for a reason. But if you if we want to get along better in this world, we need to get to know each other on an individual basis, and maybe not, don't completely forget about those stereotypical norms, but park them to the side and get to know the person on an individual basis. Uh, I'm not going to repeat what SRCX wrote. Coach Alex writes, I never wanted boys, but I kept them, three of them. Very good. I'll tell you something, girls steal your heart. When number three came along, if I'm being honest, I wouldn't trade the big guy for anything in the world. He's an amazing kid. I love him to death. He's getting older now, and he wanted to go out on this bike while I was working today. And I got a little mad at him because mom didn't want him going out because it was raining. And he got his back up and like, I'm going. And he went. And amazing kid, amazing kid. But the point is, girls steal your heart. Before I had children, being a typical guy, I wanted a boy, but you have a daughter and she'll steal your heart. Uh, and Koji Malik is talking, giving the cost for the procedure, saying it was 385 and 395 for the pill or for pills. Okay, I'm assuming that's the morning after. Um, and oh wow, so SRC, Koji Malik obviously has twins coming very, and then another one shortly thereafter, Irish twins. Um, Amy saying, look it up, Gordon. Kids taken from their families and given to the church to raise with no reason, given cash. I was talking about the Maurice Duplessis. Uh, Cash flowed in the coffers of the Catholic Church back then. Uh, wow. I will look into it. And then SRCX is saying we are a materially diseased species with violent tendencies, making irrational decisions, and we will pay the price. It's that simple. We will when we cross the veil. That's the whole story of the fall in Genesis. Is we have the DNA that makes up human beings. I forget the exact percentage, but chimpanzees and humans share 98 or 99% of the same DNA. 98, 99%. It's an insanely high. And just that tiny little difference between a chimpanzee, a created being like us, and us. Look at the massive difference between humans and chimps or bonobos or baboons or whatever. We're almost entirely alike in terms of our DNA, very small 1 or 2 percentage point difference between us. However, how those 1 or 2% and how our genes interact and how they're programmed makes such a massive difference. And when I read Genesis, when I read about the Garden of Eden story in the fall, and Satan whispering the serpent, Satan whispering in Eve's ear, you can be a god unto yourselves. You can decide what is right and wrong. I look upon it this way. It's kind of a Jekyll and Hyde, scenario, kind of Oscar Wilde, a portrait of Dorian Gray. The Bible isn't the only piece of literature that speaks to this, but it's the foundational one from which all the others sprang. And you can give in to your animalistic desires. You can call it animalistic, you can call it evil. When Candy goes out and kills a rabbit, to bring this back to the very start. My dog was out chasing rabbits, and yesterday she killed one the second time. You think she's suffering any moral angst over it? No, she's fine. Humanity, though, we're different. We're set apart. We are the pinnacle of creation. Um, and getting into the root of good and evil, maybe someday I'll do it. Maybe someday I'll go down that little rabbit or that big rabbit hole and throw out my 2 cents on it, but not tonight. I'm going to end off because I've been going on for over an hour and a half. We'll see what happens. Does this get engaged with? I'm suspecting either a lot of views, short ones, but people will be curious and check on. That will mean that YouTube is not throttling. But if I only get 30, 40, 100 or less, then I'm going to go, okay, this got throttled. Because if this got regular, just, was circulated on the feed, it would attract some attention. Anyway, I am a Christian, so I am going to end my video with the blessing that I always give. not my blessing, uh, stolen, taken from the book of Numbers. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. And may the Lord grant you peace. And he will. Had a great conversation at work with a woman, Janice. Maybe she showed up. I said her real name, but it's a common name. Older lady, older than me. And talking about her fear for where this world is going. And I was talking to her about coming to church. And she said, well, church doesn't save you. I said, you're absolutely right. Salvation isn't through church attendance. You don't come to judgment and they don't say, okay, how many times did you make it to church? Were you a regular attender? No, straight down. No, it doesn't work that way. But church is a way to help us navigate this world and to give us peace, comfort, joy, remind us, yea, though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, shall fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. You know, we need being in community, hearing God's word is a blessing and it'll help you in this world. That's what I was telling her today. And she said, well, maybe. She lives in town. I told her where the church that I attend is. She said, maybe. I said, yeah, just come, listen, enjoy the fellowship. If you don't like it, fair enough. It's okay. You might hear something. God might have something to say to you. And it might be God's not going to speak to you from the heavens. God uses people. God used Moses. God used Samuel. God used Gideon. God God uses people to do his work. So anyway, um, God bless, and we'll see you all in a night or two, probably tomorrow night. I'll have more to say. Talk to you later. Thanks. And last thing, thank you. Thank you. SRCX, OJ Malik, love seeing you back. Um, and OJ Malik is writing, God uses Trump. I don't think so. That's just my opinion. Actually, God used Pharaoh. So everyone who showed up and chimed in on the live chat, I really appreciate it. Sharunian has been here pretty much from the start of my YouTube journey. And if you're not signed up, if you're not subscribed to my channel and you think I have something reasonably decent to say, all my meandering aside, please hit the subscribe button. And if you want to be notified when I'm doing a video, then you need to hit the bell as well and get all notifications. But that obviously is up to each individual. So we'll talk to y'all later. Good night.